Hi, Global Healthcare and Culture students. Welcome to our presentation about our book, The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down, A Hmong Child, Her American Doctors, and the Collision of Two Cultures by Anne Fadiman. Today, I would love to talk with you about a little bit about our book, The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. I'd like to share with you a bit about the Hmong. Who are they? Where are they from? Then I'd like to focus on what happened to the Hmong, their experience within the refugee camps in Thailand. And then I want to share a bit about Pantao, which are their story quilts. And finally, where are the Hmong now? And a little bit about shamanism, which brings us into more information about the book that we'll be reading this semester. Anne Fadiman, who is the author of our book, outlines the aspects of the history of Hmong people that contribute to what she interprets is their fiercely independent nature. According to Fadiman, in recent history, the Hmong were among paid mercenaries fighting for the United States during the Vietnam War. Today, clusters of Hmong have settled in Merced, California, and in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The Spirit Catching You Fall Down challenges us to think beyond what we know about human health and healing, to open our minds to cultures and cultural beliefs vastly different than our own, and to consider that Western medical practices and beliefs, while of course they're grounded in science, may be even more effective when practiced in parallel with the healing practices and beliefs of other cultures. And this is so important. Such an important theme that we'll be studying throughout this semester. And perhaps more than anything else, this book looks carefully and critically, with compassion and without bias, at some of the greatest challenges and cultural failures of our society, those surrounding the practice of medicine and healing. So let's take a look at the Hmong. Where are they from? And I have two maps here. The one on the left is, of course, Asia, and you can see Laos in green. It's sandwiched in between. It's right there next to Thailand, Vietnam, and Burma or Myanmar. And the map on the right focuses on a little bit more on Southeast Asia, where you can really see the intersect. The Hmong came down from China, and they were forced down into the areas of Laos, northern Thailand, Vietnam, and a little bit in Burma. And many of them reside in these areas today, but we also have some in the United States, and those are the folks that we will be discussing in this book. So as I mentioned, the Hmong are originally from China, but they were forced to leave because they refused to assimilate their culture. They are very, I guess you can call them stubborn. They're very independent, and they are very focused on their own beliefs. There's a great deal of loyalty to their culture, and they wanted to maintain their culture. So they were forced from China, and they made their way into the mountains of Laos and in northern Thailand. Then the Vietnam occurred, and this totally destabilized the region. And the Hmong were encouraged by our government to help us win, or try to win, of course we didn't, the Vietnam War, which was called the Quiet War. And which, as you see, is such an oxymoron. It's certainly not a quiet war. It was just one we didn't communicate to the American people, the details, specifically about the Hmong. We really encouraged the Hmong to fight for us because they were hill tribe people. They live in the mountains without electricity or running water, and they are incredible hunters. They're an unbelievably skilled group of people, and they were fabulous fighters, and they really did help us a tremendous amount. And when we started pulling out of the Vietnam War, they were left, and they were targeted by the groups in the area, and it turned out to be a genocide. It was absolutely horrible. Hundreds of thousands of Hmong were killed and slaughtered. As we said, the Vietnam War is often alluded to now, more recently as the Quiet War. We actually never really even understood the role the Hmong played in the Vietnam War until President Obama went to Laos a couple of years ago and actually explored the important role that the Hmong played in helping the United States within the war. There were over 30,000 Hmong soldiers who were trained by the United States. Many were flown to the United States, some of whom were flown to the United States, their leaders, and trained here. And then they went back and trained the Hmong people how to fight with American guns and with all the, American soldier uniforms and such. You can still see these. I've been to museums in the caves of Laos and northern Thailand. You can see where the Hmong lived and where their little shrines that were set up to honor those who died. And you can see those many wearing the American uniforms. The Hmong suffered extremely heavy casualties for their involvement in the war. Hmong soldiers died at a rate of 10 times as high as that of American soldiers in Vietnam. I found this picture here of Hmong soldiers with a little sign. We asked that I think it says the UN chief, the United States, help the people. They worked for the CIA in Laos. Please help us now because they were, of course, being slaughtered. There's a disagreement over how many Hmong actually died in the war, and the estimates range from 10 to 50% of the entire Hmong population in the area were killed. Many of them were soldiers, but many were also civilians killed by mortar fire, landmines, which were planted everywhere. Many children were killed or lost limbs through by stepping on landmines, hand grenades, post-war massacres, hunger, and disease. This is a picture of a Hmong group of soldiers who the United States had trained. They finished their U.S. training and they were excited to go out and fight the war on our behalf. And if you look at these faces of these young boys, they're young. I mean, they look like they're 12, 13, 14. They were young. Everyone fought for the United States, states in the war. After the war, the Hmong war, this is a Hmong village that's burning, Hmong children standing with American soldier. It was burned by the North Vietnamese and the New Lao government. They forced the Hmong, any Hmong who were left, to leave the country, and they fled into Thailand to a number of refugee camps where there were U.S.-sponsored food drops. We dropped 50 tons of rice each day to feed more than 100,000 Hmong. Whose land and livestock had been destroyed by the war. So this slide alludes to this was called American Secret War, and here's that article, Obama Faces Grim Legacy of America's Secret War on Landmark Laos Trip. This was in September 2016, and there are a couple of articles about it, but it highlights the genocide of the Hmong people and failed foreign policies. It says the victims of a disastrous war that created incredible heroes and terrifying disaster among a quiet mountain people that we snared into our war, eventually forcing many to abandon their homeland and try to rebuild their shattered lives in foreign lands. Their story needs to be told. This was from one journalist who was writing about the war. So when they left Laos and northern Thailand, they crossed the border into mid-central Thailand, and one of the biggest refugee camps was called the Ban Vanai refugee camp. This is the picture of Ban Vanai, and I think this was a huge refugee camp. I mean, I think there were 60,000 or even more Hmong, only Hmong in this camp. I've never been to this particular camp, but I've been to a number of the other camps that had Hmong populations, but this was huge. So this is the camp where many of them lived for 20-some years. Many children were born here, and they were born stateless because they were not Thai citizens. They certainly weren't Lao citizens, so they were called stateless. They had no national, they had no papers, no identity, and no one supporting them. This is a little bit about Ban Vanai. At its peak, here it is. Ban Vanai held almost 42,000 residents. I thought it was bigger. 90% of whom were Hmong. And this Ban Vanai camp was closed in 1992. And some of the Hmong were able to come to the United States as refugees, but many were repatriated back to Laos. They were actually forcibly repatriated. The camp was closed, and many of the areas were burned because the Thai did not want the Hmong staying in Thailand. They wanted them to go back to to their homeland. So they were forcibly repatriated back to Laos. Many of them did not want to go, but they had to leave. And some went to the United States, and some of these Hmong are the folks we'll be focusing on in our book. Here are some pictures that I took of Hmong children. I worked in a refugee camp in Thailand, and these are some of the children going to school. This is a classroom on the right. On the left are children. They're taking their shower. They've got their little bowls of water, and there's some children peeking through my classroom. They were always looking through, watching what we were doing. These are some more Hmong, and these are folks in traditional dress. And I'll share this picture again, but I'm wondering if you can see me. It's a really beautiful picture of me. But I was dressed up as a Hmong bride, and you can see it in the upper right-hand corner. I'm standing next to one of my students, and they dressed us up on traditional dress day. And they'd wrapped, 60 cloth rags around my stomach, because Hmong see people who are very large as beautiful and healthy. So against my will, they wrapped me, and then put me in the Hmong wedding dress. So there I am. And anyway, they're a beautiful, wonderful, kind, generous type of people. This is a typical refugee dwelling. This was in the refugee camp in which I worked, which I'll be sharing more about later on this semester. This is the typical camp. The walls are made of asbestos, and they're tarps that extend the walls because they're very small, they're very crowded. And this urn here of water is the entire water that is available to these folks. They all share it for bathing and many times for drinking, and it's not clean water. Here are some children. These were two of my students. I taught art to some students. That's one of my many things that I did in the refugee camp. And they always brought their siblings on their back. These were two young girls. I think they were 8 and 9 years old. And every one of these children, all my students, my younger students, always had their siblings on their back. This was my first Hmong class. These folks were they all had certain disabilities. Some were almost deaf, some were almost blind, some had physical handicaps, but this was my first class, and they were all pre-illiterate in their own language, and I was teaching them English because they were all coming to America. All but one, and the one woman who's actually standing behind me, you can only see half of her head, and she was a wonderful mother, beautiful family with 3 beautiful daughters, and she was not allowed to come to the United States because actually she had leprosy on her back. She and her daughters all had just a tiny bit of leprosy, and they couldn't go, so she was repatriated back to Laos. Here are some more of my students, some of my maternal and child health students, and the gentlemen in my pictures are at least one of my translators. I taught in Thai, the Thai language, and they translated into the various Hill Tribe languages. So the gentleman who's standing to my right was my Hmong translator. No, he was Mian. He translated Mian because I could speak Hmong by this time. I could speak Thai and Hmong, and he translated into Mian, another Hill Tribe language. And the Hmong language, there are about 260,000 Hmong in the United States, mostly in Wisconsin and California. And as we mentioned already, they came from China, Thailand, and Laos. And there are a number of Hmong dialects. I spoke Hmong a bit. I could speak with my students, but it's very challenging. There's 7 to 12 tones depending on the language. And it's a very interesting bridge between all these different languages in Southeast Asia. They say that there was an ancient written language many years ago, but as they were persecuted in China, they were not allowed to speak or write in their language, and they lost the language. I don't know if I've heard other versions that they never even had a written language, that they communicated through their embroidery, which I will share with you in the next slide. Among women and girls all learn something called bandao, which is very detailed embroidery. They create these fabulous story quilts which share their traditional stories, and they will sew in the dark for hours and hours, and hours, 14 hours a day. Even the young little girls can do that, and these are some story quilts. Let's see. And this is another story quilt that shares their life in Laos and Southeast Asia and the refugee camps. This is another quilt. This one shares their experiences with the bombs coming in from being bombed from the communists They're escaping across the river from Laos to Thailand, and these are the refugee camps, and here they are coming to America on the plane. So they explain their stories. This is another story quilt. This is a quilt I have. It's huge. It's up in my house, and there's glass glares. That's me taking the picture on the right. But this is a story quilt that follows the Hmong along their life. It's really very interesting. And these are some Hmong books that some of my students made that they gave to me when they graduated. But you can see it's in English, it's in Hmong written language, it's also in Thai language, and each one is hand embroidered with their beautiful stories. It was fabulous. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about becoming a shaman. It's a calling. Not anyone can become a shaman. It's a very, very special, critical vocation. You don't choose to become a shaman. You are called through spirits that come in, and many times associated with a near-death experience or a serious illness. A common experience of the call to shamanism is a psychic or spiritual crisis accompanying a physical illness, so that a shaman can overcome the negative powers of death and disease and heal others with empathy. So the shaman will try to pull the negative spirits out of the person who is sick or injured and try to bring the positive spirits back, which is a very important aspect of Hmong culture. This is a shaman working in, I think it's in California, and this gentleman here went to a funeral and got sick. He lost his soul, and the shaman is conducting a ceremony to try to bring his soul back. And as you can see, they are sacrificing this pig here to the gods. This is a female shaman. You could be male or female. And this is in their embroidery, their bandao. This is a picture of a shaman conducting a ceremony. They have these gongs, these bells that are supposed to reach up to the heavens to bring to communicate with the traditional spirits. It's fascinating. Anyway, I wanted to give you this little overview as in addition to the book, When the Spirit Catches You Fall Down, because it's very interesting. And I want you to tell me why you think this book was called The Spirit Catches You Fall Down, and what you think that means. So good luck. Happy reading. This is one of my favorite books ever, and I'm excited to discuss it with you. So thanks. Have a great day.